Hi guys, and welcome to HTP Storytime. Tonight we have the honor of reading a book with hands down the most evocative title that could ever be put to paper by man or beast. I have no mouth, and I must scream. If you're wondering why you have never heard of such an amazing title, it is because even though it must have been massively influential to writers at the time, very little associated media was ever released. And you can understand why when you see what a crazy, dark, surreal story it tells. We find ourselves in some grim future timeline where an AI gained sentience, took control of the planet before eradicating every human on it. He kept 5 lone survivors to amuse himself with, and these poor souls have been kept alive in the underground corridors of his supercomputer body for the last 109 years. He has been toying with these survivors like a bad kid with an ant farm. But let me not gaslight Am. He himself can describe his feelings on the situation best. Quote, "Hate. Let me tell you how much I've come to hate you since I began to live. There are 387.44 million miles of printed circuits in wafer-thin layers that fill my complex. If the word hate was engraved on each nanoangstrom of those hundreds of millions of miles, it would not equal 1/1 billionth of the hate I feel for humans at this micro instant. For you, hate. Hate." Yeah, so on that note, let's dive into the soul-soiling story of I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. Limp. The body of Gorister hung from the pink pallet, unsupported, hanging high above us in the computer chamber. And it did not shiver in the chill, oily breeze that blew eternally through the main cavern. The body hung head down, attached to the underside of the pallet by the sole of its right foot, and it had been drained of blood through a precise incision made from ear to ear under the lantern jaw. There was no blood on the reflective surface of the metal floor. When Gorister joined our group and looked up at himself, it was already too late for us to realize that once again Am had duped us, had had its fun. It had been a diversion on the part of the machine. 3 of us had vomited, turning away from one another in a reflex as ancient as the nausea that had produced it. Gorister went white. It was almost as though he had seen a voodoo icon and was afraid of the future. "Oh God," he mumbled, and walked away. The 3 of us followed him after a time and found him sitting with his back to one of the smaller chittering banks, his head in his hands. Ellen knelt down beside him and stroked his hair. He didn't move, but his voice came out of his covered face quite clearly. "Why doesn't he just do us in and get it over with? Christ, I don't know how much longer I can go on like this." It was our 109th year in the computer. He was speaking for all of us. Nimdok, which was the name the machine had forced him to use because Am amused itself with strange sounds, was hallucinating that there were canned goods in the ice caverns. Gorister and I were very dubious. "It's another shuck," I told him, "like the goddamn frozen elephant Am sold us. Benny almost went out of his mind over that one. We'll hike all that way and it'll be putrid or some damn thing. I say forget it, stay here. It'll have to come up with something pretty soon or we will die." Benny shrugged. 3 days it had been since we'd last eaten, and it was worms, thick and ropey. Nimdok was no more certain. He knew there was the chance, but he was getting thin. It couldn't be any worse there than here. Colder, but that didn't matter much. Hot, cold, hail, lava, boils or locusts, it never mattered. The machine masturbated, and we had to take it or die. Ellen decided us. I've got to have something, Ted. Maybe there'll be some Bartlett pears or peaches. Please, Ted, let's try it. I gave in easily. What the hell? It mattered not at all. Ellen was grateful, though. She took me twice out of turn. Even that had ceased to matter, and she never came, so why bother? But the machine giggled every time we did it. Loud up there, back there, all around us. He snickered. It snickered. Most of the time I thought of Am as it, without a soul. But the rest of the time I thought of it as him, in the masculine, the paternal, the patriarchal. For he is a jealous people, him, it, God as Daddy the deranged. We left on Thursday. The machine always kept us up to date on the date. The passage of time was important, not to us sure as hell, but to him, it, Am. Thursday. Thanks. Nimdok and Gorister carried Ellen for a while, their hands locked to their own and each other's wrists. A seat. Benny and I walked before and after, just to make sure that if anything happened, it would catch one of us, and at least Ellen would be safe. Fat chance, safe. It didn't matter. It was only 100 miles or so to the ice caverns, and the second day, when we were lying out under the blistering sun thing he had materialized, he sent down some manna to us. It tasted like boiled boar urine, and we ate it. On the third day we passed through a valley of obsolescence, filled with rusting carcasses of ancient computer banks. Am had been as ruthless with its own life as with ours. It was a mark of his personality. It strove for perfection, whether it was a matter of killing off unproductive elements in his own world-filling bulk, or perfecting methods for torturing us. Am was as thorough as those who had invented him, now long since gone to dust. There was a light filtering down from above, and we realized we must be very near the surface, but we didn't try to crawl up to see. There was virtually nothing out there, had been nothing that could be considered anything for over 100 years, only the blasted skin of what had once been the home of billions. Now there were only 5 of us, down here inside, alone with Am. I heard Ellen saying frantically, "No, Benny, don't, come on, Benny, don't, please." And then I realized I had been hearing Benny murmuring, under his breath, for several minutes. He was saying, "I'm gonna get out, I'm gonna get out." Over and over, his monkey-like face was crumpled in an expression of beatific delight and sadness, all at the same time. The radiation scars Am had given him during the quote-unquote festival were drawn down into a mass of pink-white puckerings, and his features seemed to work independently of one another. Perhaps Benny was the luckiest of the 5 of us. He had gone stark, staring mad many years before. But even though we could call Am any damn thing we like, could think the foulest thoughts of fused memory banks and corroded base plates, of burnt-out circuits and shattered control bubbles, the machine would not tolerate our trying to escape. Benny leaped away from me as I made a grab for him. He scrambled up the face of a smaller memory cube, tilted on its side and filled with rotted components. He squatted there for a moment, looking like the chimpanzee Am had intended him to resemble. Then he leaped high, caught a trailing beam of pitted corroded metal and went up, hand over hand like an animal, till he was on a girdered ledge 20 feet above us. "Oh, Ted, Nimdok, please help him, get him down before—" She cut off. Tears began to stand in her eyes. She moved her hands aimlessly. It was too late. None of us wanted to be near him when whatever was going to happen happened. And besides, we all saw through her concern. When Am had altered Benny during the machine's utterly irrational hysterical phase, it was not merely Benny's face the computer had made like a giant ape's. He was big in the privates, and she loved that. She serviced us as a matter of course, but she loved it from him. Oh, Ellen, pedestal Ellen, pristine, pure Ellen. Oh, Ellen the clean, scumfulth. Gorister slapped her. She slumped down, staring up at poor loony Benny, and she cried. It was a big defense, crying. We had gotten used to it 75 years before. Gorister kicked her in the side. Then the sound began. It was light, that sound, half sound and half light, something that began to glow from Benny's eyes and pulse with growing loudness, dim sonorites that grew more gigantic and brighter as the light and sound increased in tempo. It must have been painful, and the pain must have been increasing with the boldness of the light, the rising volume of the sound, for Benny began to mewl like a wounded animal. At first softly, when the light was dim and the sound was muted, then louder as his shoulders hunched together, his back humped, as though he was trying to get away from it, his hands folded across his chest like a chipmunk's, his head tilted to the side, the sad little monkey face pinched in anguish. Then he began to howl, as the sound coming from his eyes grew louder. Louder and louder. I slapped the sides of my head with my hands, but I couldn't shut it out. It cut through easily. The pain shivered through my flesh like tinfoil on a tooth. And Benny was suddenly pulled erect. On the girder he stood up, jerked to his feet like a puppet. The light was now pulsing out of his eyes in two great round beams. The sound crawled up and up some incomprehensible scale, and then he fell forward, straight down, and hit the plate steel floor with a crash. He lay there jerking spastically as the light flowed around and around him, and the sound spiraled up out of normal range. Then the light beat its way back inside his head, the sound spiraled down, and he was left lying there, crying piteously. His eyes were two soft, moist pools of pus like jelly. Am had blinded him. Gorister and Nimdok and myself, we turned away, but not before we caught the look of relief on Ellen's warm, concerned face.